Hey everyone, want to let everyone know some classes that we have coming up. We're going to be at the TAC Ops Tactical Conference in Nashville, August 22nd to the 25th. If you're going to be there, make sure you come up, say hi, and attend the class.
We've also teamed up with the Savage Training Group to teach our Patrol Survival Tactics class that's going to be hosted by the Santa Clara Police Department September 18th of this year. Go to savagetraininggroup.com and get signed up before the seats sell out.
Hey, 4-9, shot fired.
Copy, additional shot fired.
Shot fired, shot fired. Shooting at us.
Suspect shooting at officer.
Break down. He's at the base of the stairs. White t-shirt, white male.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Very interesting guest today for you guys. We are very excited to have him here. Jon Becker with AARDVARK. Thank you for taking your time. I know you're in town, carving out some time to come speak with us in our studio. We very much appreciate it.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I love to be here. I love the show.
Absolutely. We did have to cancel on you yesterday, and I do apologize for that. So I did stand you up. My bad.
What about Monday? Are you going to apologize for Monday too?
This whole week's been crazy for me, so I don't even know what day today
Monday
is.
and Tuesday.
Did we?
I mean, if you're going to stand me up, a murder suspect is certainly worth. And like I told you, Kyle, 40 years of dealing with SWAT teams, you're not the first, you won't be the last, buddy.
I was going to say, how many people actually stand you up? I thought the number was going to be pretty low, but...
No, it's a long list, and it doesn't even hurt anymore. So
okay, good.
I recognize that what you were doing was probably a little more important than what we're doing right now. So
we tried. So thanks for making tonight work, though, seriously.
Yeah, no, my pleasure.
You're in town for some business stuff. Hey, I'm going to kick the ball over in your court. Tell everybody that don't know you, who you are. You've got like a very super interesting background. That we're still learning about, even just sitting here chatting before. You're kind of like the man in the shadows, and you had mentioned that. Tell everybody who you are and what your background is and what you're doing.
Yeah, so I founded AARDVARK when I was 17 years old. Started as a rock climbing company, doing rock climbing equipment. Started dealing with SWAT teams and spec ops units that were buying ropes and harnesses and carabiners. And, they would say, well, I didn't want to be a sales guy. That was my one criteria for my, late high school, early college business was I don't want to sell stuff. Mm-hmm. But in order to do business, you have to sell stuff. Yeah. So it was kind of a conflict. But what I figured out quickly was if I understood the gear at a really deep level, at a deeper level than my end user did, I wasn't a sales guy. I was a consultant, right? I was helping them to make good decisions. Turns out that was a really good business model. And I'll tell you the story. I will tell you I am tactical Forrest Gump. There was almost no forethought into anything that I did. I ended up in the right place with the right people and happened to make lucky good decisions. I don't want to portray myself as business genius boy. It was dumb luck that I just met the right people. But so I started doing rock climbing equipment, ropes, harnesses, carabiners. Started dealing with more, SWAT teams. Everybody had a rappel master. They all read Climbing Magazine, which is, where I was advertising. And they started asking for, can you get us harnesses? Can you get us ropes? And I would have conversations with them because I'd taken time to actually understand what I was selling. And that turned into, can you get us Eagle nylon gear? Can you get us, can you get us ropes? Can you get us, and as the skill set started to broaden, I started to move into areas that I really didn't know anything about. I grew up in a military family. I grew up in a law enforcement family, but, can you get us chemical agents? Dude, I don't know anything about chemical agents. Oh, we're doing a gas class. Come down, go through it with us. Okay. So exactly. So it's like my rule was I would never turn down free training.
Yeah.
By the time I'm 25, I've got 3,000 hours of special tactics training. I've been through handgun, subgun. I mean, everything, pursuit driving, jail management, because as it turned out, the guys I was dealing with who were the kind of technology leaders in their teams were also the guys that were doing all the training. And so, the center of excellence in any police department for a particular thing is the guy who's most interested in it. He's also usually the guy that teaches it.
True.
So frequently he's the first guy that I talk to at an agency who's looking for a particular thing. And back then it was, can you get us chemical agents? Can you get us Eagle nylon gear? Can you get us, you name it, optics, et cetera, armor. And I would always say, I don't know anything about it. I'll come down and you go through training with us. Well, by dumb luck, again, tactical Forrest Gump, it is the two teams that really brought me up were LA Sheriff's SCB and LAPD D Platoon. And so the guys that I hooked into very early were really the national leaders in special tactics. It was John Coleman who founded the NTOA, and Sid Hale and Mike Hillman and, Ron McCarthy and all of these thought leaders. And I guess they saw something in me that they thought would be useful to them in the future and invested a lot of time and a lot of effort in me. And it's a debt I'll never repay because it built literally my whole career in my business. 22, I go to law school. I spent 3 years in law school. The last 2 years, I worked LAPD police litigation. So I was just, again, tactical Forrest Gump. I got there during the rise in civil litigation, during all of the, dog bite cases starting off, Rodney King, the Reginald Denny case, all the SIS cases, the rise in SWAT litigation, when the ACLU really began to weaponize litigation against law enforcement, and just happened to be there for the last 2 years of law school. So that's what I started writing on. That's what I started researching, started writing for NTOA, and started teaching, alongside Sid and others, teaching legal aspects, teaching physiology. I don't teach tactics. That's not my job. But I was teaching, physics, physiology, all of the stuff that goes into chemical agents and all that.
Yeah.
And now, 37 years later, 36 years later, this is my life's work. I've done this literally my whole life. The business is very focused on tactical teams. So my job is protecting tactical operators, and everything that I do from a business standpoint, from a charity standpoint, from a philanthropic, personal interest, writing is all geared towards the protection of tactical operators.
Wow. So you really did fall into this as kind of dumb luck, and then going to law school, you got embedded with LAPD and started, doing that with them. So I'm curious. So, maybe we should circle back to this, because where we are going and now in law enforcement, I think you have a good insight on where you see law enforcement going, kind of with that background. And then where you were, you said you were there like during the Rodney King era, when all that was going on, like the legal side of stuff. So I think a lot of our listeners are curious what your thought is on that, because it's funny, full circle, here we are, 2023, all of these topics are being brought back up again. There's new litigation, there's new laws being written nationwide, which, obviously, ironically enough, everything starts in California and then kind of spider webs its way out to all the other states. So that's a huge part of law enforcement right now.
Yeah, it is.
So we're definitely going to circle back to that. So you start supplying all these gear. You never were in the military.
Nope.
You never became a cop. Did you ever want to become a cop?
Never.
Really?
Was never interested. I don't know. It's really strange. Like it was never something that interested me.
Just the gear guy.
And I don't think it's so much the gear guy is what I saw right from the beginning was the role that wasn't fulfilled was kind of the medieval armorer role, right? You think back to medieval times, you guys are going into battle. You're going to go to somebody to build your weapon system. You're going to go to somebody to build your armor. Your life is going to be dependent on that person. Whether you realize it or not, every time you're buying armor, you're betting your life that whoever did that did the right thing.
It's true, because do you even think about that as a cop when you put on your vest? Like, well, I hope whoever made my vest, I hope they had their shit together that day. And I mean, nobody thinks about that.
No, I actually just wrote an article for NTOA about this. This is a point of rage for me. I've written 2 articles now for NTOA, 5 years apart, both of them based on chicanery I see in the armor industry. There is an assumption on the part of law enforcement that our industry is a very highly regulated industry. It is not.
Yeah, I would argue it's not.
It is not. Yeah. And there is an assumption that the NIJ is running around and policing body armor companies. They are not. Right? If you submit to NIJ guidelines and you submit to the NIJ program, yes, they are paying attention. But if you just blow it all off, no, they're not, because it's not their job to police the industry. So I saw right away that there was this gap in the understanding of gear. I didn't expect to end up where I ended up. Like I planned to be a lawyer, and what happened was the community invested so much in me that I fell in love with the community. You think about the people that I deal with for a living are people who are willing to place themselves in harm's way for someone they don't even know.
Yeah.
Right. And there's so many examples. You look back at a couple that we've interviewed recently, like the Bataclan hostage rescue, like those guys knew somebody was going to die from their team. There was no doubt in their mind that somebody was going to die. They did it anyways. Yeah. So who better to serve than people who are willing to make those kinds of sacrifices and devote their lives to helping other people? And it didn't click for several years for me. But at some point, I got out of law school, I passed the bar. We're kind of at that inflection point where, my wife and I are like, okay, I tied up with a law firm in West LA doing law enforcement litigation. I quickly realized that private law enforcement litigation is an insurance company settling a case. It's never like at the city, we tried everything because we were self-insured. And the lawyer I worked for, who was a guy named Corey Brent, Corey would sell a kidney to protect a cop. Like he was that guy. And if the cops did the right thing, like he was in it for the mission and would argue passionately to protect the officer. Even if it meant the city was going to lose money. It's like, these guys did the right thing. We need to defend them.
Yeah, good for him.
So then you get into civil litigation privately and you realize it's an insurance company that's like, oh, we can give this guy $1 million. Wait, now this guy just shot at a cop. Yeah, but $1 million we're out of this case.
Yeah, we're going to save $2,000.
Yeah. And that felt kind of dirty to me. And at that point, the business was just beginning to take off. We'd started doing bigger military projects. And, it was really clear to me that this was a calling for me. There was no doubt in my mind that I was serving people that really mattered, that were doing things that really mattered. And like I said, I have a debt to this community that I'll spend the rest of my life repaying. And this is a great way to do it. And by chance, it also, gave us a great living. And I always say I'm surrounded by assholes, but they're exactly the right kind of assholes.
Yeah. I'm trying to picture a 22-year-old passing the bar and then deciding to develop and create body armor. Like where did that come about? And how did you just decide, hey, I'm going to,
the majority of my career decisions are made in anger.
Or what?
They're made in anger.
Made in anger. Okay.
So there are a lot of things that AARDVARK has ended up doing because I've either written a check I couldn't currently cash with my mouth. Mm-hmm. Like, oh yeah, we could do that. Yeah. Or I've been so frustrated and angry that I'm like, let's just do it ourselves. So right. Project 7 is a let's just do it ourselves. We started Project 7 years ago, and it was after 20 some odd years of selling armor and being frustrated because I spend my time with teams. While I'm up here, I spent a bunch of time with your old team. Yeah. Like that's what I'm doing is that's how the business gets better. That's how we serve our end users. So my time in the guidance of the business is spent with teams. What are they doing? What are they thinking about? What's frustrating and what's working, what's not working. And I could never get the industry to build what I wanted. And I finally just said, like, how hard can this be? And Dunning-Kruger effect, right? We tend to think we know a lot more about things at the beginning than we actually know. Yeah. I went into it like, oh, this can't be that hard. See, it's not that bad. And then you start to roll down the road and you're like, oh, this turns out it's actually really hard. Yeah. But by then you're committed. But that was really, I think, the genesis of Project 7. And the genesis of a lot of the products we've made have just been my frustration. I've always viewed myself as working for my teams, which is kind of backwards in the industry. And I always say, like, I didn't realize at the time how the culture of the business was being set by my end user. But like the first guys I put armor on were friends. Right. They were people I cared about. And like, I can remember we were in Arcadia doing the entire Arcadia Police Department. I knew everybody on a first name basis. Like there was never a time an Arcadia cop went by that I didn't know them. And so it was really personal for me.
And you're supplying the one thing that's going to save their life.
Yeah,
essentially.
Absolutely. It's
I guess I never really thought about that.
No, not at all.
I didn't even think about it.
Well, I'll tell you, not so funny story, but so we this year had the first save in Project 7, which was a kid named Jordan Robinson, who's a great guy. And it was a San Bernardino shooting. We talk about it on the podcast, but I mean, Jordan was shot 7 times. The round that hit Jordan's plate would have been right into his aorta, his abdominal aorta. Like it would have killed him. He'd already been hit several other times. I found out about that sitting in a parking lot waiting for my daughter to get her hair done for a formal dance. Wow. So I'm sitting in a parking lot, fat, dumb, and happy, waiting for my daughter to finish her hairstylist. And a friend called me and he's telling me about the shooting. And I knew that they were in our armor, but I didn't know what had happened. And he's walking through it and just cavalierly off the top of his head, he's like, oh, dude, your vest saved this kid's life. Like, what are you talking about? He goes, oh, he got hit in the stomach. It would have killed him for sure. And I'm sitting in a parking lot, tears streaming down my face. No idea why. Just this like a massive emotional hit of like, okay, everything we did, all the time, all the money is validated by this one kid. And when you meet Jordan, thank God. I mean, trading that guy's life for the shitbag that he shot in that field, or that the team shot in that field would have just been such terrible math. He's such a good dude. And just, you listen to the interview with him and it's like, that's the part of this that I don't think people really understand is how unbalanced the equation actually is, right? You guys spent the last 2 days looking for a murder suspect, right? Who easily could have shot anybody on your team, right? And we would be trading like our best and brightest, right? People who are willing to pour themselves in, do the right thing, help other people for a completely self-centered piece of shit.
Yeah.
Right. And so that balance always struck me right from the beginning of my career. And it really resonated with me that there needed to be somebody who protected you.
Yeah. I'm sitting here thinking about that particular case, and it's like all the time or all these years and time and like you already said, money that you've invested in this product to make it what it is now. Like the one time it saves one guy,
that's well worth it.
All the well worth it, right?
100%.
Like, I want to know, like, so you kind of touched on it, but like, I want to know what that personally felt like that had to hit you pretty hard.
I'm literally sitting, and we had saves before in other people's armor. And, they hadn't always been like, you guys would get grazed or whatever. Mm-hmm. But this was like, we had built the product. It was on nose. It's Project 7. It's us. It's, it's a team that I fitted, that, we know. And I'm literally sitting in a parking lot with tears streaming down my face. And I kind of didn't understand the emotion of it. Like I knew it was going to be an emotional thing. I didn't know it would hit me the way that it did. And it still hits me this way. Like we just did an event to celebrate Jordan, and the chief from San Bernardino showed up and at our event presented Medals of Valor to the 4 guys that were in the van. And like, you can't, until you see that and you see the effect it had on their families, like you can't understand it. I remember there was probably 10 years into my career, and a Glendora cop named Louis Pompey was killed. I didn't know Louis, but Louis was really close friends with all the guys at Arcadia. And one particular guy, Joe Bale, who was a dear friend of mine, now dead, but dear friend of mine, great guy. Joe was 6'5", 350 pounds of, the guy. He's big, he's jovial. He always has a joke for you. Everything he says is funny. That's Joe. We went to Louis' funeral with Arcadia PD. I sat behind Joe. I'd never seen Joe do anything other than smile and laugh. I watched Joe absolutely decompose at Louis' funeral. I mean, he was sobbing. He was ugly, crying like a child and didn't care. And I walked out and I told my wife, like, I'm never going to be the same. And she said, why? And I said, that's what happens. If we fuck up, that's what happens. Like, that's the consequence. And it's easy to see it on TV and go, cop gets killed. Okay, his family's probably fine. Like, no, that's not true. There's a 23-year-old girl getting hanging a flag, right? There's 2 little kids that'll never see dad. And all of that, still to this day, like it like hurts to think about. And so then when I got to the point that I had to choose, like, am I going to practice law or am I going to do this? This was a really easy choice for me. Like this is a very meaningful thing to do. And it's kind of overlooked. We kind of forget. Yeah.
I mean, you just don't think of that. You don't think of that side of it. And I know as cops, like, we don't think of that stuff,
No, I remember when I was on the team, we got Project 7 and that was brand new gear. And I'll tell you the story later about getting it. But, I put it on and was thankful that it was a better product and lighter and was built for me, not thinking and knowing everything on the other side of it, not realizing that when I put it on, I should be saying, thanks, Jon. You should put a little patch on the inside that says you're welcome. Yeah. So when people put it on, they're like, they think like there's a real human being that is doing this to make people's lives better and safer.
Oh no, when we did the saves presentation for Jordan, we brought in Ed Hinchy. So Safariland builds our armor for us. Because if I was going to bet my life or my son's life on armor, I'd bet it on Safariland. So that's who we partner with. And we had all of our sewers. We had our whole staff at the event. And I brought in Ed Hinchy, who runs the saves program. If you're going to watch any episode of my show, watch the episode with Ed Hinchy. Ed was a Pittsburgh cop who was shot in the line of duty. He runs the saves program for Safariland. Ed has interacted with more cops shot in line of duty than probably anybody in the world. And you can look at their saves program and go, it's a marketing thing. It is not a marketing thing. Ed has an almost unlimited budget to make sure that the officers that are shot in their armor are taken care of. And that might mean they go to SHOT Show, they get a presentation, They meet the people that made their armor, and that's the end of it. Or that might mean that Ed is pouring his heart into trying to find resources to help families that are damaged. And I've never seen anybody care as much as he does. I like to jokingly call it the Hinchy asshole test. If you meet Ed and you don't love him, you're an asshole, and that is the only data point I need to know.
Yeah.
You know, one thing I was thinking about too is the downfall of it too is if something were to happen, or if, you know, God forbid, an officer gets shot wearing, you know, your particular armor that you design, and there's a fatal cost of that. Not saying there's a fault of yours or whatever. I'm just saying I couldn't imagine the weight or the feeling of that.
Every single, yes, I think about it every day. Every single thing that I recommend to a team, every single thing that we sell to a team, somebody's life is bet on every day.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. And it's very easy to like, oh, you know, they're informed consumers and, you know, whatever. No, like in the end, our job is to make sure that you guys are safe. And if we fuck that up and you get killed, that's on us.
Yeah, fuck, man. That's
right?
a lot.
But it's an easy to, I don't think that the majority of the industry sees it that way, because they didn't have the experience that I did of spending all of my childhood immersed in teams.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a lot of the reason that I like to stay very current with teams and spend time with teams is it is a constant reminder. You know, yeah, it makes me smarter. It makes us better, makes the business better. It's also a reminder that what we do really matters and we need to pay attention.
Yeah, no doubt. Speaking of that, Mark, you wanted to ask him if you knew what an aardvark was.
Well, I know what an aardvark is.
I know, but you wanted to ask John.
Of course I know what an aardvark is. It's an earth pig. Yeah, absolutely.
It's an earth pig, yeah.
You are a very intelligent guy. I pegged you to know the answer, and I was like, dude, I'm pretty sure he's going to know the answer. And he's like, I don't think he's going to know.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, he just totally set you up.
I was like, aardvark?
Yeah.
Like, that's an interesting African animal.
It is probably one of the ugliest animals I've ever seen.
I think you need to see some baby aardvarks.
You should have had that as like
they're adorable.
logo.
So our original logo was a hand-sketched aardvark. Yeah, absolutely. Traced it out of an encyclopedia.
Did you name it aardvark because ground pig, or?
So no, what happened was when I started the business, I didn't really know where it was going to end up. Like I knew we were going to do climbing equipment, and I wanted something kind of weird and quirky and something that didn't fit the industry. And one of my friends said, "Call it aardvark." I'm like, "Why?" And he goes, "It's got 2 A's. It'll be the first listing in any phone book."
Damn, that's actually from a marketing standpoint, that's smart.
Right? I'm like, wow, that's, you know, and I remember thinking, oh, that's really smart. And then I thought, I'm not going to name my business Aardvark. And then 2 weeks later, Aardvark was the name I remembered.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, and the thing is, in our industry, it is so freaking weird. Everything is falcon, hawk, tiger, lion, you know, everything's,
Aardvark.
and Aardvark, right?
You will remember it.
Once you learn it, which will require some spelling lessons.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're just listening to this on audio, Google aardvark. It's a pretty
people are, dude.
Interesting.
They're on Google Image right now. They're like,
yes,
Aardvark.
Jesus,
What
the hell is that?
Yeah.
It looks like Mark.
All right. So you talked about how you came up with aardvark, the name. What about Project 7? I know you said that was you were pissed.
Yeah. So Project 7 was kind of a rage project for me, and it was a passion project. It was like my view of armor. I look at armor the way that you look at the parachute in a fighter jet. It is there because this doesn't have an opportunity to do its job, right? Mm-hmm. You are wearing armor to protect you for when your tactics and or shooting skills do not protect you.
Yeah.
It is not your primary method of protection, right?
Yeah,
A parachute in a fighter jet is oh shit, the plane's going to blow up. I'm out, right? That's how I look at armor. So what's always frustrated me is the armor industry never really spent a lot of time, or a lot of the manufacturers never really spent much time thinking about how you actually use armor. How does it sit on your body? How do you move? My view has always been that you've got to be able to shoot and move effectively, because if you can't shoot and move effectively, you need armor, right? So that's always been the frustration for me. So as we started to research it, it was like, how do we make this stuff actually work and allow guys to fluidly move? You know, the words from the beginning were comfortable and athletic. And athletic really matters, especially when you look at what a modern team is doing, especially in a hostage rescue or a linear assault, anything that's high movement, high speed, it really matters. And so when we started Project 7, we actually worked with Safariland, who gave us a designer to design a platform. And we started with literally a white paper. And I walked in with a list. This is what it has to do. And number one on my list was weapon platform. You've got to be able to shoulder a weapon effectively. You've got to be able to shoot. Lower on my list was trying to get guys to wear upper arms, because upper arms have kind of at that point gone out of fashion because they were poorly designed and they didn't sit well on the arms. Shoulders.
Yeah.
It's a crazy statistic. 18% of cops that are killed in body armor are shot through the arm.
Yeah, I believe it.
14% are shot in the head.
Wait, go with those stats one more time.
18% are shot through the arm. 14% are shot in the head. You would never run a tactical operation without a helmet.
No.
Well, our team, you had to wear your shoulders. Like it was suicide not to. Like it made no sense. And our old gear was very difficult to shoulder a rifle.
Correct.
And sometimes raising your arm up, it
you
clinked in there.
You really couldn't.
But that's why guys stopped wearing them.
Yeah.
But you think about what you're presenting as you make entry.
Yeah, your shoulders.
You're presenting your shoulders, right? You're presenting the side of your body.
Yeah.
And so that was, there were several things on my list that I want to make sure we do this. And we developed the platform, which then led to a small design cell, which then led to a manufacturing cell, which has now led to more than half the company is dedicated to just building armor. And now we can do anything. We can start with a white sheet design and end up with a completely manufactured product. And the name Project 7, we went through 5,000 different names, and I wanted something that was, again, kind of amorphous. You weren't really sure what it was. There's too many, simple project, and so we tried all these different things. I'm like, it's just a project. I'm like, well, why don't we get a project and a number? And then we went back and forth on numbers, and, somehow Project 7 was the one that were like, oh, yeah, let's just call it Project 7.
So very simplistic on both names.
Yes.
I like it.
Yeah. I'm not a big marketing thinker.
All right. You do a lot of leadership stuff. You teach a lot of leadership classes for Cato, other SWAT conferences and within organizations, correct? Oh, sorry. Now, am I not talking into the mic?
No, you're not.
Yeah. Sorry. That was for all of you that listened to the last podcast. We heard you loud and clear. We are very much so working on the microphone and our guests talking to the microphone. John's doing a great job. He runs his own.
Is that why you guys tape me to the chair?
Yeah, and we said
Yes.
don't move.
We threatened him, don't move.
Yeah. All right.
So, hey, let's. I think a lot of what we like to talk about is leadership and leadership in law enforcement, where it fails and where we think it fails. Just by design of what you do, you have a lot of eyeballs into a lot of different agencies, and you're embedded into a lot of different departments. So you get to see a lot of different cultures and departments. What do you see that's working? What do you see that's not working? And kind of like this cultural shift that's going on currently in law enforcement. And then I think when you and I spoke on the phone a little bit, you kind of had this idea of where you think law enforcement's going.
Yeah. So I've watched this cycle several times in my career, right? I mean, Rodney King is the most egregious example where everybody knew that there was going to be a pivot in law enforcement. Law enforcement polices at the consent of the people. And like any other government entity, that consent is sometimes more freely given than others and sometimes taken away. And the actions of law enforcement, the representations of law enforcement kind of drive the public perception. And that's kind of where society gives or takes permission from law enforcement, right? The George Floyd case being a perfect example where the majority of people, every cop I've ever spoken to about it, were offended by what they saw. Right. It was clearly an unconstitutional act.
Yeah.
I mean, in the end, our constitutional rights live and die in state and local agencies. Right. It's like I remember going to the Holocaust Museum and they said, the thing people don't understand is it wasn't the Nazis that came for the Jews. It was the local police. Right. Local law enforcement is where the Constitution lives and dies. It's not on the floor of the Senate.
Yeah,
right.
No,
It's in Citrus Heights or Sacramento or Rockland or someplace else in the middle of the night on a traffic stop. Yeah. And so we get these events, and certainly there is an organized opposition to law enforcement, and they're lying in wait. They're waiting for George Floyd. They're hoping for George Floyd because they already have bad legislation written, right? And they're just waiting for somebody to make a mistake. But I've seen this cycle go back and forth over the years. I actually think we've probably seen the apex of this cycle. I actually think we're starting to move backwards. It got pretty bad with BLM protests and everything else, and California trying to pass more stupid laws. I think it's starting to move back because what we trade for our freedom is our safety. Right. That's when you go to the airport and you have to take your shoes off, you are directly trading your freedom for your safety on the airplane.
Yeah.
That's true with law enforcement. right? The permission we give you to police us, we are trading a certain amount of safety for that. And some comfortability and everything else. And, you can go to any major city right now and look at what's happening with drug use on the streets and with homelessness and, crime, and see that we've made kind of a stupid trade. And so I think we're in the process of gradually starting to move back towards the middle. We never settle in the middle. The balance is never right? We're overprotected. We're underprotected. It's never going to be a perfect balance, but it's a balance. So to me, it looks like we're moving back in the right direction, but I do see trends in law enforcement that I think are really deeply disturbing. There's a couple things that I think, when we did 3% 50 in California.
You're talking about
for the retirement system.
Yeah.
When we decided that police officers should retire at 50, and we were going to give them, in some cases close to 100% of their salary for the rest of their life, we made a trade. And the trade was, we were going to take everybody that had 20 plus years of experience and have them leave the organization, and we were going to replace them with somebody who had no experience. That was not a good trade. It's a good trade for the cops that took the retirement. It was not a good trade for law enforcement in general. And so, you think about the guys you work with, and you think about when guys really hit their powers, right? They're at the height of their game. Their ego's not involved. They're thinking clearly. They've got a lot of experience. They're in their mid to late 40s, and they're about to retire.
Yeah.
And so the people that are in a place to impact the culture and do understand it are being driven out. The other thing that we're seeing is this kind of notion of cancel culture, right? Like, one of my favorite lines is, the founding fathers would never get elected today, right? Mm-hmm. Nobody that founded this country would ever make it past their first media interview.
Probably not.
Right? So Jefferson was a great man. Well, he was complicated. Yeah. Washington was complicated. Yeah. Madison was complicated, right? Yeah. These guys were all complicated. They're brilliant thinkers. They put our country in an amazing place. They acted beyond themselves. We don't believe that anymore. So now it's like, well, the first time this guy screws up, let's get rid of him. The problem with that is, if you look at the founders of SWAT and you look at the real guys that have been huge influences in law enforcement, they're guys that have made mistakes, right? They're guys with experience. And the guys in an organization that are working dangerous assignments, the guys that are working street dope and working SWAT and working NARC and working K9, they're all going to get in trouble, right? They're all going to make mistakes. And they're aggressive, forward-leaning cops who are the guys we want leading organizations. But now we go, oh, that guy's been in trouble. Let's promote this guy who's just been in admin his whole career because he knows more. He's not the leader, right? He's not the leader. The guy that went hard charging into the active shooter, that's the leader. That's who we should be rewarding. We're not. And so I think there's a really disturbing trend of promoting people who are avoiding conflict and avoiding difficult assignments their whole careers. And as a result, they get into positions of leadership and they don't have the experience. They don't have the breadth of experience. And so I think those two trends are kind of setting us up here to see the kinds of things that you have seen in some of these major catastrophic events where, the leadership of the organization just abdicates responsibility.
God, I'm like sitting here like, oh, because I'm like, listen, dude, 100%, I agree with you. And I guess I got to be careful what I say, because I don't know if my bosses were going to see this, but I agree with you. And I think a lot of cops' frustrations are exactly what you just said. You got a lot of people in the industry who avoid the conflict, who don't have that experience that those types of cops have.
Yep.
And now, am I sitting here saying all those cops that are on the front line, the tip of the spear kind of guys, are they always going to be a good leader? No, I don't.
No.
But you do need someone to see the big picture, right? And take that step back. But I find it that in just doing this for 16 years and seeing guys like that promote, it's hard for them to get a good picture of like what this job really is and how fluid it really is, and that it's not 100%. You can never remove the risk or danger from the job, right? A good leader, though, with that level of experience, being the tip of the spear guy who does it long enough, is going to have a good idea of how to mitigate that risk as much as possible, but know in the back of your mind that that risk is still there. Now, how do we mitigate it? That to me is a good leader. Where I see where a lot of departments struggle is they don't want to recognize that in guys that, sorry, Mark, and I'm trying to focus on you as well, but they have a hard time letting guys like that lead because I feel like they think that guy who was the tip of the spear is just running and gunning and not seeing the big picture. And top admin are afraid to promote guys like that because they think they're going to put them in some precarious situation that's going to be some huge liability event, right? Like maybe it's a lack of trust. I don't know, but I don't know. I mean, you're sitting there saying that, and I 100% agree with you. There's not enough of those tip of the spear guys that are leading organizations. I think part of it also is misunderstanding. Like I had an argument with the chief of police who had turned away a guy that had worked MARSOC. So, he worked in a special operations unit. All the combat deploys, probably got PTSD. He's probably got all these problems. He's going to be too aggressive. And I said, so you took a guy who has been proven in ridiculously complicated situations, has not only survived, but thrived. And you turned that away and you literally just picked a random name out of a hat. Probably a 22-year-old kid with zero life experience. Correct. That kid is going to make more of a tragic mistake than the guy that's been 100%. In special operations. That's 100%. The problem. That's the problem. But there's this crazy notion that, and I don't know if you've read Radley Balco's book, Rise of the Warrior Cop. If you haven't read it, you should read it. Every cop in the United States should read this book because you will agree with probably 90% of what he says. Like 90% of what he says, the way he recites the Constitution, the way he talks about where it came from, I always say it's 90% spot on, 5% I disagree, 5% you're totally full of shit. And the 5% you're totally full of shit will boil your blood, but that's okay. That's a small price to pay to understand the adversary's thinking, right? And it's the problem is that those kinds of books and the positioning of law enforcement, and I mean law enforcement to some degree has done it to itself, right? Like I watched small town police departments get MRAPs and kit themselves out in multicam with M4s, and their 6-man SWAT team is going to go serve a warrant with an MRAP for a pharmaceutical warrant. Like the public looks at that and goes, that's not reasonable. Like in the end, what you do has to be constitutionally reasonable, right? Yeah. And it's I always said like the gun lobby is a perfect example of where like the media will go find the stupidest 3-tooth hillbilly who wants to own a cruise missile, and that's going to be the representative. And that's the same thing that happens with law enforcement is they go find the most egregious example, and that's what the public's going to hear about. Here's the problem. Law enforcement has no counter narrative, right? There is no counter. I just wrote an article for Police and Security News talking about the Breonna Taylor case. And one of the things that struck out to me is I did I did a lot of research before I interviewed John Mattingly. Like I read everything. I put the lawyer brain on and read everything, watched every video, watched everything I could find. And there were several things that kept sticking out to me. One of the things that kept sticking out to me is the police department had no counter narrative. So the soon-to-be vice president of the United States is on national television saying that the police served the warrant at the wrong house and killed an innocent woman in her bed. And the police department didn't respond, right? So guess what? That's the narrative. Why do you think that is? I think it's a couple things. Talking about this actually yesterday, totally off topic, but we were just having this conversation yesterday with each other. Why do you think that is? I think it's two things. I think one, law enforcement has historically had a circle the wagons mindset because they're constantly being attacked by the media, and that's the perception is the media's coming after us, they're attacking us, so circle the wagons and try to fend it off. And I think that kind of natural circle the wagons approach of we can't trust the media, we can't talk to them, because clearly, you could say 99 smart things and one really stupid thing. The one really stupid thing is going to lead the news, 100%. Like I don't think that's because the media has a grand conspiracy against law enforcement. I just think they want eyeballs. Of course, and I think the stupidest thing you say is the most interesting thing. So I think that's part of it. I think the other thing is that we've allowed an organized opposition to position the narrative in a way that no matter what law enforcement says, it looks like it's being defensive. And so there's this idea that like if we start talking, it's going to be used against us and it's going to look defensive. So let's just wait and let the facts come out.
I think we watch a lot of press releases and management speak on the news throughout the country. I mean, we monitor and look through all that stuff. And one of the common themes is that what we try to do in this podcast is be very neutral and just talk about what's happening.
Yep.
And what I notice in a lot of these press releases, or I guess that's what it is really, it's a press release or interviews, is it's very robotic, and generally the ones that are put in front of the camera are defensive of their agency, who they are. I'm a cop, and they're not taking themselves out of it and saying, we're doing something, this is what happened, and we're going to tell the public, this is what we know right now, and we'll figure out what's going on if there's violation, whatever it is, just being real with the public. They're very defensive.
It's stupid.
For no reason.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, I love what LAPD is doing. The way LAPD is handling critical incidents is like, here's all the video. We're conducting an investigation. We don't know what's going to happen. A lot of facts that aren't in this video, but here's the video. Because, I always tell people, like, it's kind of like a horror movie. Think about like the early slasher movies, the Friday the 13th, Halloween movies. Like when you didn't know where the guy was and you hear the scary music, you're terrified. The minute you see him with the knife, it's just kind of campy and stupid. Yeah. Your imagination will take you to places that the facts won't. And so when you hear innocent black woman killed in her bed, mistaken warrant, you conjure up an entire image. Then you find out what actually happened and you're like, oh, none of that's true. So what you see is when an agency gets out in front of it and says, here's the video. We're still investigating. We're trying to figure out what happens. You see the video and you're like, oh, fuck, the guy had a gun. Or like, oh, they shot this poor innocent guy. He was running away from the police. No, he was running. He was shooting over his shoulder. Yeah. So yes, I learned that working police lit. Like, oh, he was shot in the back. He was shot in the back because he was running away while he was shooting at the police.
It's almost like when cops are in front of the media and they are giving a press release or whatever, it's almost like they're in court and they're having to defend themselves. Like they're being questioned by an attorney about what the actions that they took, and they have to feel like they're being defensive.
They are.
Cops are, I think when Sheriff Lamb was here, he made a great point, when it comes to the way they do things in their PIOs, and they hire people within the media to handle their PIO stuff because he recognizes that cops suck at talking to the media and being in front of cameras and talking to reporters. That's not what we are trained to do.
That's not what you're supposed to be doing.
Well, it's a different skill set.
It's a different job.
Yeah. It's like, would you go to veterinarian to get dental work? No, because he's a veterinarian.
No,
you might. That's fair. If it saves you money. But no, like, it's crazy to think that, oh, this guy is a really good narcotics investigator. Let's make him the PIO. Yeah. How about if we hire a professional PIO?
Yes, someone that is trustworthy, that has the ability to talk, that knows what is going to be said, and then you have them partner with an officer or sergeant or a lieutenant that tells them what happened. They figure out, and then they actually give that information instead of putting someone that has never done anything, that promotes, is defensive to the public, and a general person would watch that and be irritated or offended by the press release.
Yeah,
have more questions. And then that person, the officer that does the press release goes back, and then everybody is like high-fiving, like, you did a really good job with this press release, when it's really like they should be analyzing that and going like, we got to do better next time.
Yeah, because in the end, the media's investigation is going to take 24 hours. Yours is going to take 12 months.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
So own the facts out of the gate. Here's what we know. Here's what we see. Here's the video. Here's all the audio. Here's everything we know about the facts. We'll investigate. We'll get back to you. And the public sees it, and 95% of the public look at it and they're like, oh yeah, I shot that guy too.
If you don't give them the narrative, if you don't provide them with a narrative, they are going to come up with their own conclusion.
Oh yeah. Scary music, dark lit hallway.
Yeah.
Here comes the slasher.
It's just crazy that agencies to this day are terrified to do that.
Well, I mean, to be fair though, it's bitten them, right? Like this is a snake that has bitten. The one example I always love to give. So Daryl Gates, one of the things Daryl Gates is, most remembered for is saying that blacks are more likely to die from a chokehold than normal people.
Oh God.
Right. Which is a pretty bad soundbite.
Yeah.
Okay. What Chief Gates actually said was, it looks like, based on the data, a young black male is more likely to have a hyoid bone break and to die from a chokehold than a normal healthy person is. Wasn't saying that he was abnormal. He was comparing it against normal healthy person, but that's not the way it was portrayed, right? So there have been countless examples. And I knew Daryl. Daryl was a friend. Daryl was an amazing guy. Never heard him say a racist thing. Never heard him say a sexist thing. Actually, never really heard him swear. But he had a amazing gift for putting his foot in his mouth in a press conference. Yeah. And so there's all these examples of where this has hurt law enforcement. And so I remember when I started the podcast, part of the reason that I did, and I'll kind of give you the origin story, is we had a friend, Tim Anderson. Tim, Marine Colonel, Vietnam experience, Persian Gulf experience, amazing guy. Also LAPD K-9, integrative thinker, really deep thinking guy, did a lot of work on tactical science with Sid Hale and was an amazing instructor. Tim got ALS and died. And I remember standing at Tim's funeral and talking to Sid and saying, do you realize how much law enforcement lost today? Mm-hmm. Tim never wrote a book. Tim never taught on video. We don't have it on audio. Like, all of this is gone. Like
all
that
knowledge gone.
50, 60 years of experience, poof, gone. I said, it's so stupid. We've got to figure out a way for guys like this to get on video and to get on audio and for us to be able to carry these lessons forward and to share them with a broader audience. And Sid looked at me and said, if you can figure out a way to do it, we'll do it. But we're not talking to the media because we can't trust them.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was ultimately what led to the podcast was, okay, I own the footage. I own the audio. You say something stupid, I can cut it out.
That's the great thing about doing these podcasts is we control the narrative. Yes. And whatever we decide to put out is we're still putting it out there to a huge audience. Yep. And you're putting it out there to a huge audience. Yep. But the nice thing is like you control it. Yep. So nobody's gonna, well, I guess I could take sound bites or whatever from your videos or audio or whatever, right? But you're controlling the narrative of what's being said. There's nobody in the media world to tell us what to say or to command us on how to do certain things. And,
it's one of the things I love about what you guys are doing, right? Is you think about it, the majority of people have no positive interactions with law enforcement, right? Like the average person, the only interaction they ever have with a cop is at one of the worst times of their life, either because somebody got called there or because they just got pulled over or their dog got run over by a car or somebody in their house got hurt. There's not this positive impressions. And so they don't understand what you do. And they're not going to take the time to understand what you do. And if there isn't a counter narrative, if there aren't cops that are willing to come forward saying, hey, this is what happened, this is what the officer saw, the public doesn't know. And so what they see is a talking head on a news station with a political agenda on almost all the news stations, right or left, who's going to clearly be biased and maybe hasn't ever been on the job or hasn't been on the job in 25 years. And he's going to tell you what to think of this. Well, if there's nobody on the other side.
Yeah, no, totally.
Right. So like when you guys are taking body worn video and breaking it down and going, this is, here's what I see as a guy who's done this job. Here's what I see. That gives the public an opportunity to see a reasonable side of law enforcement and to begin to understand. And I think that's where we've got to get better at telling the stories of law enforcement in a way that when an incident happens, the chief of police comes forward and goes, hey, I don't know everything. Here's what I know. Here's what we saw. And then later comes back and says, here's the findings and here's why we found what we did. And here's all the things that I couldn't tell you that I knew, because there's usually a lot of stuff that the department knows that they can't share.
Yeah. Which is fair.
Yeah, no, it is.
Should wait.
It is, but it is asymmetric battle, right? Like the media gets to swing freely. It's like, it's like terrorists, right? They don't have rules of engagement.
No.
It makes it a lot easier.
What else are you noticing that with your travels and working with different teams and departments? I
think we've probably seen the beginning of the end for dynamic entry on search warrants.
Yeah, I agree. That's fizzled out.
It's funny because I interviewed Phil Hansen, and Phil was one of the original SCB guys, and Phil helped to run the NTOA, was one of the earliest members of NTOA, and Phil's a legend. And one of the things he said is, what we realize now retrospectively is when all these SWAT teams were built, like you got to go back to the origin story, right? What is the origin story for most SWAT teams? Munich Massacre, 1972. That is when SWAT teams really explode across the United States. Munich happens, right? For those that don't know the story, a bunch of terrorists take Israeli athletes hostage. It is the first live broadcast of a news event worldwide. They end up the police are completely ill-equipped. They have no idea how to handle it. It goes catastrophically to shit. Everybody gets killed. And the world goes, wait a minute, if these terrorists are going to take hostages, why are we not more prepared? So if you look back at the origin story for, pick your tactical unit other than 22 SAS in Great Britain, they all began between 72 and 76. And the reason is, one, you had there's a lot of tumult at home, right? Police officers are checking their cars because bombs were being put under them. It's the 70s, right? But you have these acts of international terrorism, and we go on this kind of rampage of terrorism. Well, in 84, the Olympics come to LA. And President of the United States says this will not happen here. Governor of California says this will not happen here. Head of the Olympic Committee says this will not happen here. And D Platoon, SEB, FBI hostage rescue team all spend tons of money, tons of time training for hostage rescue and training to prepare for counterterrorism. So the roots of SWAT are actually in counterterrorism and hostage rescue. And so Phil talked about how, that's what they were learning was hostage rescue tactics. Well, then when SWAT teams are serving search warrants and they're hitting, rock houses and all that, they just applied those tactics to the new mission. And I think that has led to some obviously bad outcomes. You can read Balco's book and find several of them. And I think that we've kind of seen a point where society is looking at some of these cases and just going, I'm not okay with this. And so I do think the majority of major cities in the U.S. have already gone away from dynamic entry. So I think the days of the no-knock warrant, I treat them as two different things. People conflate the two and say, no-knock warrant and dynamic entry.
Yeah, not the same.
They're not the same, right? No-knock warrant is a legal concept. Dynamic entry is a different concept. The thing is, when you were serving no-knocks dynamically, you go back into the 80s where they just hit the house. Yeah. Like it was, Sheriff's Department, boom, search warrant, off they go. They had a tactical advantage. They had the element of surprise. Yeah. The minute you stand at the door banging for a minute, there's no tactical, like you do not have an advantage. No. Right? So now the dynamic tactics, it's funny because when Sid Hale went back to SEB, he cut back a lot on their dynamic entry. And I said, well, why did you do that? And he said, he goes, the more I thought about it, the guy inside the house has made so many bad life decisions that the sheriff is knocking down his door with a SWAT team. I'm going to give him 30 seconds to make a life-changing decision. He's not going to make the right choice.
Oh, no.
Right?
Come to the door.
So I do think as a trend, the NTOA has come out with a kind of an opposition statement to dynamic entry and to no-knock warrants. I mean, dynamic obviously for hostage rescue doesn't change. That is a tactic, but it's a tactic, right? It's not a strategy.
It's a tactic for a specific operation.
Yes. So I think we're seeing that happening
everywhere. I mean, now you're seeing a lot of pickaways and if you think about it, it is smarter. It's smarter. It's safer for everybody, really. I mean,
well, especially when one of the things that Thor Eels talked about when I interviewed them is Thor's the director of the NTOA is safety priorities. It used to be called priorities of life. That sounded a little too callous. So now it's safety priorities, right? Innocent victims, hostages, police officers, suspects, evidence, right? And most people don't put evidence in that priority.
Yeah.
Right. But if you really stop and think about it, evidence is in that priority. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that Thor said is don't trade anything above for anything below. Well, if evidence is at the bottom of the list, why would we ever risk a cop's life for evidence to make the case? Yeah, I get it. The problem is we're assuming nothing bad's going to happen. Mm-hmm. But if you look at it retrospectively, when a narc gets killed on a search warrant, like, you look at Breonna Taylor and John Mattingly, if that had killed Mattingly, what could they have possibly found in Breonna's house that would have mattered?
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately they never even searched her house when all was said and done. But like, what are we willing to trade Kyle for? There's not much. And so I do like that we're seeing that trend. And I think it makes a lot of sense. I think we're also starting to see kind of a foundational trend for professionalization of tactical teams.
There's a sad, that makes me think of a sad story that occurred, I think a couple years ago in Kern County, Southern California, and this might ring a bell to you when I talk about it, but along those lines, SWAT team lands at a house, shots fired inside, they know victims are inside. They don't know who's dead, who's alive. Guy shoots at cops when they arrive, patrol guys when they arrive on scene, right? So that's how the SWAT team gets there. It's interesting when you research this story and watch the body cam footage of it. There's no active shooting or any stimulus inside this residence, but the SWAT team arrives. They're not there for a long time. They make the decision. We're going to go in. We got victims in there. We know that for a fact. We're going to go in. So I guess quasi hostage rescue is really what it is. So that decision's made. The problem is when the team goes to go make entry through the front of the door, he opens fire from the inside of the house and shoots and kills, I believe, the first SWAT guy in the driveway. And then I want to say shoots number 2 man. He lives, but they end up grabbing number 1 and number 2 guys, peeling back. And the moral of the story is the mission was never accomplished in the first place, because if the objective of the mission was to go in there and conduct a hostage rescue at any cost, and a SWAT guy goes down and unfortunately gets killed and then aborts the mission immediately, what was the point of the mission in the first place? I have a hard time wrapping my head around that story, and I have when it came out. And every time we go teach a class, I've brought it up before in classes. And it's like, if you really think about that, if that was your mission, was to go in there and conduct that hostage rescue operation, I'm sorry, when the number one man goes down, you got to step over the number 1 man and complete the mission, because now it's like, fuck, you just lost a SWAT guy for what? We never completed the mission. Yeah, well, and you've obviously lost the element of surprise. You're going into an ambush. Totally. And the problem is, like, so many of these things, you can look at them retroactively, right? Like, it's, Monday morning quarterbacking is a very easy thing to do with what we do. But the problem is, I actually don't think there's enough of it. This is going to sound paradoxical, but when I started my career, I probably went to, the first 5 years of my career, probably 100 debriefs, because information was shared in the community through debriefs, right? Before the NTOA caught on and the tactical, the original copies of the Tactical Edge, you go back to the early, and they were full-blown, honestly written debriefs, because it was mailed out. Everybody had to be vetted. If you advertised, you got the page your ad was on. It was the only thing you got. You never got the magazine. The magazine was like an intel report that everybody guarded jealously. Those days are gone. Anything that you put in a publication now is subject. So there's still kind of this notion of telling story, right? Sitting down face to face and going, here's what went right. So in the 35 years I've done this, I've watched debriefs go from here's all the shit we did wrong to here's how cool we are. Yeah. And that's not a debrief, it's a story. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a war story. So like we do a lecture series. We'll do them once or twice a year, sometimes a little bit more. And that was actually one of the genesis for the podcast was we would, an event would happen, Bataclan happens, we bring over the guys from BRI, we bring in an audience, handpicked audience of 200 cops, 150 cops, and, 75, 80 agencies, no cell phones, no video, Chatham House rule, everybody's going to be honest. One of the first things I ask people when we're going to invite them to our lecture series is what went wrong on your op. And if that isn't a long list, there's nothing to debrief.
Yeah.
Right? That's the point of a debrief. What did we screw up? What did we get right? Yeah. I've seen that morph more into story and move away. And agencies have done that in part because they're risk averse. They don't want to document the mistakes that they made and give plaintiff's counsel an opportunity to go, well, in this debrief, you said this, right? I think civil litigation's put a lot of downward pressure on self-investigation in law enforcement and in self-reflection in law enforcement. But I think that the trade that we've made there is officer safety, because we're going to continue to make the same mistakes, right? If you look back, there's a new podcast called Night Raid. Have you guys listened to that yet? No. It's about a case in Pomona. Officer named Sean Diamond was killed. It was a Mongols gang member. They hit the house. He shoots, it's Breonna Taylor, basically. He shoots the first cop through the door, a guy named Sean Diamond. Sean gets hit in the neck. It kills him. This guy is tried twice, hung jury twice. They end up pleading it to involuntary manslaughter and time served, because he says, I thought I'm a dirtbag. I'm a gang member. I thought I was getting ripped off. I didn't know it was the cops, right? Come forward 15 years, Breonna Taylor, that's exactly Kenneth Walker's defense, right? So what are we doing as a community to bring in a young officer and say, hey, these are all the mistakes everybody before you made, right? And it goes back to the earlier theme, that 50-year-old cop is the one that's like, hey, dude, 20 years ago, this happened on our team. 20 years ago, this team happened. 15 years ago, we saw this happen. Like, don't do this.
Yeah. You know what that's called? That's called experience.
Yeah.
And that's called making a good leader.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Well, everyone wants the police department to be transparent, but they're not transparent internally.
Nope.
They don't share that information.
That's a huge problem.
And
So
but see, that's what's beautiful about what you guys are doing. And that's what we're trying to do is like, my whole goal here is I now have a platform, as do you, to take somebody like Jordan Robinson, and the interview I did with Jordan was Jordan, their medic, and the second guy behind him, Chris Shipley, who saved Jordan's life. And it's like, walk through the operation. What did you do wrong? Tell me your lessons learned. And now somebody in whatever shoe, Wisconsin, watches shots fired and is like, oh shit, we shouldn't do that anymore.
So what is talk about your podcast?
I was going to say, pitch it, the debrief.
Yeah, because
it's called the debrief. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, you keep
Again,
talking about
simple names.
Why didn't we think of that?
No brilliant branding here. What's it called? It's called the debrief. The podcast is long format, and it's really designed, furthering my life mission, protecting tactical operators, of bringing what I see as the best and the brightest, right? As the best leaders we can find, as guys that have had particularly novel events, really kind of advanced thinkers, and putting them on the record, so to speak, for a tactical audience. The show is for a tactical audience. I don't know what the crossover demographic is. It's not much, because it's very technical conversation. It's not hero stories. It's like walk through what were you thinking? Why'd you make the decision you did? No tactics. We're very careful to kind of walk around anything that could help, future asshole to prevent what would happen. But taking these incidents where we have lessons learned and we can now put them on a platform. First season was video, second season's audio. We figured out our guys were listening to it on patrol, or driving to work or running or whatever. And it's really tried to take the smartest guys I can find and give them a platform to educate somebody they'll never meet. And like the great joy for me is, I'll get an email from somebody. I got an email from a guy in Nova Scotia, right? Who I've never been to Nova Scotia. That's a long way from Southern California. Yeah. And this guy said, you have changed the way our team trains for events because I listened to this podcast episode. I'm sure you guys get those emails all the time, right?
Yeah. Very satisfying.
It's ridiculously satisfying.
Yeah, it's motivating.
All of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes you want to do this.
Yeah.
And realistically, every one of those guys, right? Somebody's going to watch shots fired and see an incident and go, "Ooh, I'm not going to approach a car that way."
Oh yeah, we have had that, and it is satisfying.
Yeah. So to me, that's the root of it. I'm not monetizing it. There's no advertising in it. It'll never have sponsors. I've intentionally built a firewall between AARDVARK and the debrief. Mm-hmm. So the way, they say men's brains work like boxes. My brain works like boxes. There's the Jon is CEO of AARDVARK box, and then there's the Jon recipient of kindness from the tackle community box. Yeah. And they're different boxes. And so like you'll never see AARDVARK reference. I actually cut out discussion of AARDVARK if somebody brings it up. I cut it out because it needs to stand on its own. It needs to not have this underlying commercial tone where people are like, oh, they're just doing that to sell product.
Yeah, I respect that. I really do respect that you're the guy in charge here, right? And your whole building a business is to market yourself and sell the product. But I do respect that you're not out there pitching your product on the debrief. You are keeping it separate.
It cheapens it.
Because you're right. It does come off as it almost just comes off as like a sales pitch.
It is a sales pitch. I mean, how many trainings have you gone to put on by manufacturers where you're like, oh, that's great. I've heard about every device you make. Oh, yeah. Why don't you tell me how much some of them are used? Yeah. Tell me how some of them are used.
If you want more of this training, just, hey, go hire us. We'll come out to your department for $3,000 and we'll teach you guys. You're like, damn, dude. All right.
Yeah. It's just, I've been through so much of that, and it is a very slippery slope. Right. It leads to incremental decision making. Amy Winehouse did not intend to end up that way. She made a series of very bad decisions. Yeah, right. Yeah. And so it's easier for me to just build a wall between the two and never talk about one on the other. And keep in mind, the mission of the debrief is to provide information that will save guys' lives. And I honestly think that is a much higher calling than even my day job is, because it'll have it has a greater impact, right? The business can only protect the number of people we can interact with. Mm-hmm. That's not true with a podcast, right? You guys
everywhere,
thousands and thousands of people all over the world are watching your show.
Yeah. I mean,
and they're people you not only will never meet, you don't even know where they live. You don't even recognize the name of their town.
Yeah. We get guys from,
all over
Ireland. Yeah. I mean, we've had Australia, a lot of listeners from Australia. I mean, all over the place.
Yeah.
So it is wild. It is very cool where a podcast can go, and the information that, and again, we already said it, but like the information you put out is what you want to put out.
Yes.
So that's the unique thing about
it. It's what you care about. Like we started this kind of shorter series now that we're calling Battle Proven Leadership. And the idea of these shorter episodes is, let's take people that are tangential to tactical that you would never meet. You'll never have a conversation with. The first guy we interviewed was a nuclear submarine commander. Right? You're like, what can a nuclear submarine commander teach me? Well, he's got a crew of 190 people. Any one of them can kill everybody.
Yeah.
And 185 of them are 22 years old, and most of them don't even have a college degree.
Yeah.
Right? How do you create a culture that is ridiculously safety conscious, but also is questioning authority? And so the guy's name is Bob Kuntz. It was a fascinating conversation. I just interviewed a guy who's he was a Royal Air Force guy, was, aviation safety, pilot, crew chief, or pilot, trainer, all that. He now does commercial dive stuff. And like, he's written a bunch of stuff on what he calls counter-errorism. His name is Gareth Locke. In 30 minutes, Gareth talks about, like, what do we really need to care about with safety culture? Right? It's not something you'd run into. You listen to it and you're like, oh shit, there's something I can take from there. Right? We interviewed Kevin Sear from RCMP, who's one of the bigger tactical thinkers I know. RCMP's ERT team is a full-time 60-man team in British Columbia, 200 plus operations a year. Like, this is a, LAPD, LA Sheriff caliber SWAT team. And Kevin's a big thinker. He's a leadership thinker. And so what I'm trying to do is take things that are right on the fringe of stuff that you would read or hear about and just expose you to it. Because if I can get you to think of the problem differently, even if it's some subtle little inflection in your thinking, that may make you safer. Right? And it can be something really simple. Bob Kuntz talked about tripwires and how in a Navy submarine, there are certain things that happen that if that happens, there is an immediate response and there is no discretion at all. So if a submarine gets within a certain distance of a vessel, the submarine immediately takes evasive action, regardless of what the vessel is. Fishing trawler, somebody that could have nothing to do with it. If it gets within this radius, you will immediately take evasive action. Why? Because the one time they didn't do that, nuclear submarine crashed into a fishing trawler. Ugh. And they relieved everybody in the chain of command. No kidding. Why? Because tripwire. Right? You think about that from a SWAT team standpoint or a narcotics team, like, if this happens, we immediately stand down.
Yeah.
Nobody thinks of it that way.
No.
And so we do incremental decision making.
Yeah.
And that's why they do it, is to stop incremental decision making. So I think there's a lot of stuff. A lot of what I'm trying to do is change the leadership and change the way the leadership in tactical units is thinking. And both in trying to affect future leaders and also just to get guys to look at the problem differently. And then expose you to stuff. I'm ridiculously fortunate. I deal with the top units in the world. And I have a level of access that is far beyond what I deserve, what anybody deserves, but far beyond what I deserve. But it gives me access to some of the most interesting, amazing people who do stuff that is just crazy. These counter-terrorist units in Europe and the stuff that they're doing, it's insane. So it's like, let's bring those guys out. Let's try to get those guys in front of an audience that they would never see.
Yeah. That's crazy. And it's funny too, because like we talk about leadership and you have like all these great ideas of changing the culture of law enforcement. And the fact is you were never in law enforcement. You're just surrounded by it. But I think from your outsider's perspective and being embedded in so many different departments and knowing so many different cultures, I think you have a good knack for that.
I think the fact that I have some objectivity
think that's what it is.
Like I'm emotionally invested in law enforcement, 100%.
Yeah.
It's how I've made my life really care about cops. I'm not emotionally invested in any single agency. I'm not emotionally invested in cops always doing the right thing. The con law background and kind of the way that I look at constitutional law, like I'm mildly anti-government at my core. I'm not anti-local government, but I'm kind of mildly anti-government. Like I think that, the Constitution wasn't written to give us rights. It was written to prevent the government from taking them. Yeah. Right. And I think there was a lot of wisdom in that. And so that kind of, I guess like a mildly libertarian bent to my thinking does, I think, give me the ability to look at these situations somewhat objectively. In the same way that you guys are taking like what you're doing with body worn cameras, right? Of here's the facts, here's kind of an objective look. Like let's not get emotional. Let's just have a logical discussion about stuff.
Yeah, and you're not politically motivated to make certain decisions. Like it is an objective opinion from an outsider's perspective.
As much as it can be. Like it's in the end, like look, I love cops, I love SWAT teams. I've dedicated my life to them.
What do you think about canines? Not obviously. You've never even said canines.
I don't know if I ever told him I was a dog handler. So
yeah, dog handler.
You were expecting a dig, dude, and you're not going to get it.
So first of all,
he looked at me.
Everybody knows that the smart partner is the one at the end of the leash, not the one holding the leash.
True.
Yeah.
That's nice. I think canines.
Sorry, Kyle, on this one.
I think canines are a really interesting question right now. California took a serious swing at banning bite dogs.
Oh, they're coming back with another swing.
They again, like if you've never watched the show on Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the notorious RBG, you should watch that documentary because you will understand how the adversary thinks. Before Ginsburg was the Supreme Court justice, she was an ACLU lawyer. A lot of the rights that our wives and daughters enjoy, they enjoy because a case is brought by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ginsburg goes through the cases and talks about, like, we were waiting for this kind of a plaintiff. We knew we needed to move the law. We had to wait for this kind of a plaintiff, right? Law enforcement doesn't look at it that way.
Yeah.
The opposition does. Mm-hmm. So they're waiting for stupid dog bite. Yep. And there have been plenty of them. You're a canine handler.
They happen all the time.
If you've ever sat through Gene Ramirez's class on canines, you see the list of just like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me.
But it continues to happen. Even though we're sitting here talking about it, it's everyone's been talking about it over the last couple months that this law came out for California. Guys are still going to make stupid decisions. Yeah.
I think one of the problems that we have, and this is again like a bigger trend question, I think one of the problems we have is we are underfunding the training of law enforcement catastrophically. Yeah. Right? Like we're taking an airplane pilot with 100 hours and putting him in charge of a 787 and saying, I hope it goes well. Like if we're going to have canine programs and we're going to have SWAT programs, like the discrepancy in skill set that I see dealing with teams from tier 1 units to very small part-time teams and from US based to European based. I always use the example of, it's like a driver's license. I've got a driver's license. My daughter's got a driver's license and Lewis Hamilton has a driver's license. We're all drivers. Mm-hmm. We don't all drive the same.
No.
And when you look at law enforcement, it is not a monolith. The difference between a full-time 60-man tactical unit and a part-time small, 10-man rural team is huge. They have the same mission, right? But the skill set gap there is catastrophic. And so we have to have those skills. Right? We need to have tactical teams in small rural areas, and those areas don't support full-time tactical teams because they don't have that many ops. But then what we're going to do is we're going to look at that part-time team, or we're going to look at that canine that's had one bite in his career, and that's how we're going to judge every agency in the United States and go, well, see, dogs bite bad. And I think that we really need to take a serious look at how we handle canine services, tactical services. There are parts of the world where regional teams are the way that they do things. Mm-hmm. And they're not. The challenge with the U.S. is we have so many law enforcement agencies, 18,000 is the number that keeps getting thrown around, that, they're not 18,000 ridiculously good canine programs in the United States.
Yeah, there's nothing. In fact, there's a lot of stuff that I've been reading on regionalizing a lot of stuff and just having those teams be mobile. because you have consistency in the training. It's expected throughout.
Yeah.
I think we should have you come back and really dig into that subject, because I think that's a whole nother subject about the training and what you've seen, because that could be super interesting.
Yeah. I mean, short answer, I think there's opportunity for improvement. And I hope that improvement comes, and I hope we start to fund law enforcement training effectively before we have really stupid law.
I would ask both of you guys, what is the number one thing that always is going to get a training shut down for anybody? I don't care if it's a cop, as somebody in a specialty assignment. What's the one thing that always gets cops shut down for a training? Funding, money. No, you can't go to that class. It's $250. We can't. It's not in our training budget for a class that potentially could get you trained up to be able to handle something that much better, to be that much safer for everybody. But we don't want to pay the $250 to send you to that class, to bring that knowledge back, to make you safer, your team safer, and then ultimately make a better decision on the street to then mitigate that liability for the city or the county or whatever.
Well, we've talked about this.
It's tough. It's a tough balance.
Yeah.
I get it. The budget's there. But fuck, man, you talk about funding.
We make very short-term decisions. I mean, one of the consequences of the U.S. political system being as volatile as it is versus other parts of the world, and I'm not arguing for a president for life. Believe me, I'm not arguing for that. But our political cycle is less than 2 years, right? Chiefs of police last 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
City managers last 2 to 3 years. Mm-hmm. So they don't really give a shit what's going to happen in 5 years. Yeah. They're concerned about the next 2 years, which is, what are we doing with this year's fiscal budget and what are we doing next year's fiscal budget? The problem is we're making trades there. Again, recurring theme. We are making trades for future consequences. Yeah. Right. One of the guys that works for me always talks about screwing his future self. Oh man, future Brent's going to look back at this and say, God, past Brent was such an asshole. Right. Like, we are making long-term decisions with your career with guys that are going to be in that office for 3 years, and sometimes are from an outside agency.
Well, Sheriff Lamb said this perfectly. In those people that are making those financial decisions within law enforcement that have promoted are managing $1 million budgets when they don't have the ability or knowledge to manage their own budget at home, which is significantly
have never been trained on it.
Yeah. And that is the person that is telling you, no, you can't go to this $125 class.
It's Kevin Sear, the guy from RCMP. One of my favorite lines in my interview with Kevin is he said, they handed me, I've got I think it's a $23 million budget for a SWAT team. And he's like, biggest financial decision I've ever made was buying a house, and I was terrified and didn't really know what I was doing.
Didn't read anything.
And now they're like, here's $23 million. Like, don't screw this up.
Yeah.
And again, we're not adequately training. We're not giving, what should be happening is in an agency, there should be somebody that's helping with fiscal decisions. Yeah. But part of the problem for law enforcement, and I didn't realize this until we started doing the foundation stuff, is law enforcement or government are consumers of money. They're not makers of money. They're consumers of money.
Yeah.
Right? The chief of police never has to think about how the money is made. Right? I've had that problem since I was 17, right? If I didn't make enough money, I didn't eat.
Yeah.
So that's always kind of front of mind. You try to make fiscally responsible decisions. But when somebody just hands you money constantly, which is what happens with our government, we hand them money and they make decisions. Don't expect good fiscal planning because they don't have to think about where it comes from.
Right.
But we're making a lot of really short-term decisions right now that are we're seeing now the long-term consequences, right? We're seeing police departments having the most difficult time they've ever had retaining cops. Hiring is, I will tell you, worldwide, but especially in the U.S., 60-man team means 42 guys.
Yeah, we see that everywhere. All right, I got one last question for you.
Yep.
When you first started, you talked about making climbing gear and rappelling and ropes and stuff. Are you a mountain climber?
I was then. I would boulder and rock climb.
Okay.
I was never, I sat next to a girl in college who was like, hey, I work for this climbing company, and I'd go climbing with.
Me too.
Yeah, exactly. Pretty much.
I'm an expert climber.
Pretty much. That's the story of my career right there, Kyle. So a whole lot of, I can do that.
Yeah, I can do it.
But they had this climbing device that they were going to be selling. She's like, we understood a mail order business. I'm like, okay. And off we went. You never know what door you open, man.
I'm confused why you asked that like an hour later.
Because this whole time, like this, because you talked about being 17, starting a business, making this climate, but you never said if you were or not.
No, I mean, I bouldered and that kind of stuff.
Super curious.
I was never, apparently that's just what I do. I just find gear for people that do things that I don't do.
Yeah. That's awesome.
You're successful at it, so congratulations.
Can you find something for Kyle to do? Because he just sometimes just tries to pick on me and annoy me. Mostly.
I think it's what makes your partnership beautiful.
Exactly.
I don't think you want to disturb that tension.
Oh yeah.
John, pump the debrief. Where can they find it?
The debrief.live. It's also YouTube, any of the major platforms, the debrief with Jon Becker. And, wherever you get your podcasts and, just if you know of somebody I should interview, if you have feedback, I would love to hear it. It's a passion project. It's a work in progress. Please, write in, call in, do whatever we can do that will help guys be safer. We're in for.
Perfect. So you're our competition. Got it. No, I'm just kidding. Totally.
I looked at it as a cooperative thing, but
no, totally kidding. I think it's awesome. The more people that talk about this, then the better, maybe not in our time, but in due time, those behind us it'll be better for them.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, dude, like when we're looking and we're like, cops are so well trained that the podcast space is so overcrowded with good quality, then we're competitors. Until then, it's cooperative.
Yeah, for sure. And we're not there yet. So
definitely not.
Well, you're awesome. Thanks for coming in. It's
my
nice.
pleasure.
Appreciate it after Kyle stood you up twice.
Yep, my bad.
So
it's worth it.
If people want gear, tactical gear, outfit their SWAT teams, send them.
AARDVARKTactical.com.
Okay.
You reach out. It's, we're always happy to talk to teams and, find new products and help it any way we can. One of our views of the business relationship is that my job is to keep you safe. That doesn't always mean I sell you stuff. So we are more than happy to field calls from people who are like, hey, we're looking at this. Even if it's something we don't sell, we'll help. We deal with so many teams. a lot of my job is pointing teams to other teams and saying, hey, these guys are using this. So if you have questions, you have, things you can't solve, reach out to us. And if we don't know, we will find you somebody that does.
Cool. Nice. I'll put all the links for the websites, the debrief. We'll put all in the description, so it'll be in the show notes. Thank you, dude. It was an honor to.
Thank you, man.
Pleasure meeting you.
Yeah, thank you.
Mark, you can't reach over the table, but you guys can probably knuckle it out or something.
Again, you're doing weird stuff.
It's just being hateful.
Yeah.
It's just being hateful.
Anyways, thanks, guys. Jon Becker.
Thank you.
See ya.